Good afternoon, everybody.
Buenas tardes.
Hello, buenas tardes. I am delighted to greet you all. My name is Salima Rotero. I'm the director of the Latino Studies program and a professor in the departments of folklore and ethnomusicology as well as gender studies. And I am very excited to be here and to be opening this wonderful event. This is really a homecoming for one of our own, Mintzi Martinez-Rivera, and we are here to celebrate the publication of her book, Creating Culture, Performing Community, which is very significant for me because it is the first book that has come out in my book series with Indiana University Press under and these books and this wonderful, rich book that you'll hear all about this afternoon will be available for purchase and for a book signing at the very back here, and so please do avail yourself of that opportunity. A couple of announcements here before I turn it over to John Nieto Phillips, who will be introducing Dr. Martinez-Rivera for us. Back there's information about the Latino Studies Program's newsletter, as well as our Cesar Chavez Undergraduate Symposium. I'm not going to say too much about it right now. It's just we have some information back there, but it is a wonderful opportunity to get an undergraduate involved with the Latino Studies project and present their materials in the spring semester. And there's some history here because Dr. Martinez-Rivera was, I think, one of the initiators of the actual undergraduate symposium. John Nieto Phillips was actually there with her, and I was the second annual keynote speaker. So we have some history there with that. So please, there's information back there, and please take a look at that. We have some flyers back there. It is my pleasure to invite John Nieto Phillips, who is a former director of the Latino Studies program and a professor in the Latino Studies program as well as in the Department of History, to introduce our guest.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for being here, and what an honor to introduce you. And Mintzi, we were just talking beforehand. It's been 15 years that we've known each other. 15 years. And I can think back to the Soli, you reminded me of the meeting where you suggested the idea of a symposium. And we're in this conference room. And you had that idea, and then you had ideas for classes that we should be offering, and classes you developed, and you became, well, I've got this whole thing here, but it's just a very meaningful visit to me, very emotional visit too, because she's one of our own. So it's really a great pleasure and honor. So, and I just admire what you've been. Well, I'll just read this. I'm going to repeat myself. So I'm truly honored to introduce someone who is near and dear to me, to the Latino Studies community, into Indiana University. Dr. Mintzi Auanda Martinez-Rivera is an assistant professor of English and folklore and Latinx studies at The Ohio State University. She is an IU alumna, having received 2 PhDs here, as well as 2 master's degrees in folklore and anthropology, graduating with her PhD in 2014. As an undergraduate, she studied history at the Universidad de Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras, where she earned a bachelor degree cum laude. During her time at IU, she was an indispensable part of the Latino Studies program, still is. She developed and taught courses, served as its associate director, and helped grow the program to record enrollments. She went on to be an assistant professor at Providence College before being recruited to Ohio State. In less than 1 decade, Dr. Martinez-Rivera has compiled a truly impressive record of research. She has written on the indigenous rock movement in Mexico, on Purépecha vernacular cultural practices, on conducting research in conflict zones, and on decolonizing research methodologies. Together with our own Dr. Salima Rotero, in 2021, she co-edited a collection of essays titled Theorizing Folklore from the Margins, Critical and Ethical Approaches, published by Indiana University Press. And in 2022, she, Dr. Rotero, and Dr. Rachel Gonzalez Martin co-edited a path-breaking special issue of the Journal of American Folklore titled Redirecting Currents, Theoretical Wayfinding with Latinx Folkloristics and Women of Color Transnational Feminisms. Dr. Martinez-Rivera's leadership in academia and beyond has earned her a reputation as a leading voice in the field of folklore. She has served on the executive board of the American Folklore Society, has been recognized with the prestigious award from the Institute for Scholars and Citizens, formerly the Woodrow Wilson Institute, and she has served with the Social Justice Collaborative, a nonprofit organization in California that provides legal aid on asylum cases. Today, Dr. Martinez-Rivera will be sharing with us aspects of her new book, Creating Culture, Performing Community, and Angahuan Wedding Story, published by Indiana University Press in July. Hot off the press. Without further ado, please welcome our dear colleague, alumna, and our beloved friend, Dr. Martinez-Rivera.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much for coming and this warm welcome. And it's always a pleasure, really, to come back to IU and to see you all, and to see so many of your friends, colleagues, get to know and get to meet new grad students and the new generation. And it's just always amazing. So thank you so much for the invitation. But first, I would like to acknowledge and honor the indigenous communities native to this region and recognize that Indiana University-Bloomington is built on indigenous land and the homelands, on indigenous homelands and resources. We recognize the Miamiaki, Lenape, Bodwedwatmik, and Sawanwan people as past, present, and future caretakers of this land. I would also like to acknowledge the lands of The Ohio State University, the place where I work, which occupy the ancestral and contemporary lands of the Shawnee, Potawatomi, Delaware, Miami, Peoria, Seneca, Wyandoti, Ojibwe, and Cherokee people. The university resides on land ceded in the 1795 Treaty of Greenville and the forced removal of tribal nations through the Indian Removal Act of 1830. As I acknowledge the lands that we are in and where I work, I would also like to acknowledge the lands from where I come and my ancestors and relatives that paved the way for me to be able to be here. I hail from the Purepecherio on my father's side and from Boriquen on my mother's side. As a child of conquest, colonization, and displacement, I take the land whenever I go. Second, I would like to agradecer a Soli and Latina Studies program for the warm invitation to come and share my published work. Since we met 20 years ago, Soli has been an amazing mentor and intellectual comadre. No, it's 20 years. And I would not be where I am if it wasn't for Soli. I'm also grateful to the Native American and Indigenous Studies program and the Department of Folklore and Ethnomusicology for their support in this event and for helping with my visit. I would also specifically like to thank Ruth Baca, who unfortunately is not here, for helping set up this event, all the logistics, all those different things. So I'm very grateful to her, as well as everybody that made my visit possible. So muchas gracias. So let me do this. And make sure that this is paused. I don't know how many of you remember this image and what happened here. So this is an image of a sign in 3rd Street, the 1814 East 3rd Street building, when Latino Studies was moved to that building in 2010. And this is now the Military Science and Aerospace Studies building. And when they moved us, they put in a new sign, but they did not include us. So one Monday, we came in and someone who will not be named, but maybe it was Johnny Phillips, came in and basically cut and pasted a sign that said Latino Studies and put it in the billboard and the sign outside of the building until IU, whatever they do, whoever is in charge of these signs, actually made a new sign and included us instead of erasing us. So this is what that image is, that we all came on Monday and there was a sign. So I have this picture of this sign, and then I have the sign of when we were actually there. But I wanted to talk about this particular image. Because when I started working at OSU in August 2023, I participated in multiple events focusing on the importance of ethnic studies and specifically Latinx studies. In my presentations, I always said, Latino studies saved my life. both physically and intellectually. People normally chuckled, thinking that I was exaggerating because, you know, Latina. But I'm not exaggerating when I say this, and so let me explain why. As a graduate student coming back from fieldwork in 2010, Latino Studies actually gave me an intellectual home, funding, which, you know, very important, and helped me to become the professor that I am today. With the mentorship and support of Arlene Diaz, Jonito Phillips, and Silvia Martinez, that were the core faculty, part of the core faculty at that time, I was able to finish my PhD, and then later, when I was graduating, I was offered a job as a visiting assistant professor and the interim director of Latino Studies. So in total, I was in Latino Studies 7 years. As a visiting faculty, they helped me transition from graduate student into a professor. For example, one day Arlene was like, Mintzi, and I don't know if you remember this, we're like, Mintzi, this is how you write emails now, so you don't sound as a graduate student. And those little things are transformational, because we don't know what we don't know, right? Until someone actually teaches us. And now I do that with my students. And I'm not the only one that benefited from the amazing Latino Studies community. Like me, so many other graduate students, such as Hugo Viro Vargas, Joana Moya Fabregas, Jose Najar, Kimberly Stanley, Juan Berumen, Eduardo Wolf, Rachel Gonzalez Martin, Eric Cesar Morales, among so many others, were able to finish because of the support of Latino Studies. Intellectually, teaching in Latino Studies transformed my intellectual journey and my research, moving me away from narrow intellectual approaches that centered only on Latin American studies to incorporate the often invisibilized and misunderstood experience of the Latinx communities in the United States, as well as the rich and brilliant scholarship stemming from these communities. My work, therefore, thanks to Latino Studies, became transdisciplinary and hemispheric. Grounded in community, the work that Latino Studies does goes beyond academic publications and intellectual pursuits, and has helped support, nourish, and encourage generations of individuals that are transforming the world and paying forward the gifts that they have received. Therefore, I would like to take this opportunity to express my deep appreciation, agradecimiento, and love to the Latino Studies program at IU. This is one of the gems here at IU, which they don't know, but they are lost. So, mil gracias por todo. Because this is, at the end, is the work about community. I talk about community, but the work that we do at the end cannot be possible without community. And with that, I'll transition out to my book, and that was the end of me reading, actually, a little bit. A note about the PowerPoint I wanted to mention. Basically, the PowerPoint is all the images from the book, just in color, because the images inside of the book are in black and white. I didn't get money to be able to make that in color. The next book, though. So the images are just scheduled to rotate as I speak. So at any point, I may stop them and actually maybe unpack the images, but they're just going to be there. Okay, so now let me talk about the book. So what is this book about? We woke up just after 6 on a cold April morning. As I lay in my warm bed, buried under a pile of wool blankets, I could hear the early sounds of the community. The sounds of different animals waking up, the crows of roosters, hens clucking, cows mooing, dogs barking, and birds singing, buses and trucks going up the road into the sierra, and the sounds of neighbors turning on their radios to kick off the day with music. Minutes before 7, as the sun rose over the mountains and dissipated the morning mist, Juana, Emiliano, and I left the house. Everybody else in the house was still fast asleep. We walked briskly to Beatriz and Anselmo's house, which was very close to us. When we arrived, Paulina and Laura, Beatriz's oldest daughters, were already up and sweeping the patio. Decorations of white and blue balloons and white cardboard cutouts of doves had been put up last night, and the tables for the feast were in their place along the patio. The parangua, the fire pit, was lit in the kitchen, and older female relatives were starting the preparations for the different meals of the day. Beatriz and Anselmo had already left for the church to make sure everything was ready for the wedding mass. Pablo, the groom, came out of his room. He was wearing new clothes today, a black leather jacket, blue jeans, a button-down shirt, and a pair of black boots. We had come to the house specifically to accompany Pablo to the church. Before we left, Pablo knelt in front of his grandmothers and Juana and Emiliano to receive their blessings. Pablo's nervous gaze swept the patio, and Juana gently reminded him that it was time to leave. We walked to the church where Pablo's parents were waiting for us, along with the bride, Lisa, her family, and their wedding godparents. Lisa, like Pablo, was also wearing new clothes, but hers were not mestizo. She wore the traditional Purépecha female attire. Her xutacua skirt was pink, her tangaricua apron was green, her saco, outer blouse, was blue, and her cuanindicua, rebozo, or shawl in English, was a beautiful midnight blue. Padre Armando gave the initial blessing at the church entrance and led the procession toward the altar where the Catholic wedding mass took place. We left the church after the mass, and as soon as Lisa and Pablo walked outside of the church, a wind band, which had arrived during the mass, began to play. Relatives lined up to hug them and offer their blessings and congratulations. Pablo's sisters, Paulina and Laura, and other young female relatives began throwing confetti at the bride and groom, and the people gathered around them. As the unofficial wedding photographer, I took requests from relatives wanting pictures with the couple. After around 20 minutes of pictures and congratulations, the procession began. Pablo and Lisa at the front, flanked by their wedding godparents, followed by young female relatives throwing confetti. After them, the rest of the wedding party, mainly aunts, uncles, and other relatives, followed. At the end of the procession was the band playing music. This was the beginning of a very long and very amazing day. So this was the first wedding that I actually witnessed in Angahuan. I had been going to Angahuan at that point already for 3 years during the summers. But because I had been there during the summer, I had never actually witnessed a wedding because they don't happen during the summer. They have a particular time period in Angahuan in terms of when they perform the weddings, which is, again, as I said, not the summers. So that totally and completely transformed my research. I was not planning on doing research on weddings, so that even surprised my advisors. But as I started documenting and participating more in the community, I started seeing how a lot of the rituals, a lot of the events, and the calendar of activities throughout the community actually revolved around the wedding. And what originally had brought me into the community, which was I was interested in seeing how young people engage with their cultural practices in the community, I started seeing actually how all of that played during the wedding and the performance of the wedding. As I mentioned originally, what I was thinking that I thought I was going to do for my dissertation was looking at how young people in the community, as I mentioned, engage, transform, and participating in the community and cultural practices. Normally with indigenous communities or youth more broadly, there is the perception that young people are forgetting their culture, they don't want to do things, they're changing it, and that is bad. And I was like, no, that, change, we should not be afraid of change. That is good. And specifically with a lot of scholarship and still as the public policy regarding indigenous population, if an indigenous person changes, they cease to be indigenous, right? And so that was some of the ideas that I had at the beginning, and I was like, no, indigenous people, like other humans, they also change. Their culture changes, that doesn't make it less or more indigenous. So as I continued documenting and participating in the community, those ideas really started, my initial ideas of what I wanted really started coming together in the wedding, and how the wedding actually brought together a lot of the different strands and elements that I was actually seeing in other spaces. So the book very much then, even though it is about weddings, is about so much more. Because I use then the wedding to talk about social organization, to talk about gender dynamics, to talk about age, to talk about change, transformation, and specifically to ground it in Purépecha epistemologies and ways of thinking and doing. So, to give you an idea a little bit more, Angahuan, the community where I do my field work, is in the state of Michoacán. Some of you probably, because some of you know this, because when I was a grad student, I would talk about this. But Angahuan is in the Purépecha area in the state of Michoacán. It's one of the principal indigenous groups of the state. Not the only one. There are total 5 indigenous communities in the state. And I was raised in Pátzcuaro. So my dad is of Purépecha ancestry, but because of, politics, Mexican Revolution and stuff like that, my grandfather, my grandparents, was like, we're not indigenous, we're mestizo. So my dad and his siblings, my uncles, right, they were not raised thinking or embracing their indigenous identity. My dad is actually the only one that identifies as indigenous, and then he shared that with my siblings and I. So, we grew up in Purépecha region, in Pátzcuaro, right? We grew up in this region, but for my research, I went to Angahuan, which is on the other side, of the mountains, and I've been going to Angahuan at this point now 20 years. So I always stay with the same family, the Gomez Santa Cruz, who were the family, or well, still are, of my language teacher at the university. I started taking language classes, Purépecha, during the summers. And Lucas Gomez Bravo, he was a leading linguist and Purépecha scholar. He unfortunately passed away in 2016. And so he introduced me to his family, and they opened the doors, and they allowed me to join them. And so all of my research is as a member of this family, and as a part of the community, again, behaving as a relative of this family, right? As another daughter inside of the family. So the Purépecha area is it's actually very big. It's very diverse. So even being in different communities, and the way that the wedding is celebrated in Angahuan, for example, is different than in other Purépecha communities. So something that I talk about in my book from the beginning is this is not the Purépecha wedding. This is just one example of Purépecha weddings. And I also mention, obviously, the fact that all the different the practices and communities. Let me start again because wind. That is the last one of the images. So that the level of diversity inside of the Purépecha culture and Purépecha community, right, serve as the foundation of also Mina being, so this is the wedding, because there is no wedding, the wedding, right? So a lot of the work and a lot of the stories then are very much coming in from Purépecha ways of thinking that, again, are not homogeneous, right? And doing a little bit of that process. So the process of writing this book was, as many of you know, very hard. And especially because it took me a long time to try to find the story. And the story that I wanted to tell and how to tell the story. And also at that time, I think I was like, I want to write something that is edgy, and weddings maybe are not edgy enough. And I have actually, and I kid you not, like 3 different drafts of the book from different points of view. So so this is why it took 10 years. So until I was able to find the draft, and as I was mentioning, right, this is a work of community, and community working with me or walking with me in the process, right? As I was struggling to find the story, but I was working with Soli. First in Chiricu, the special volume for Chiricu in 2017, and Theorizing Folklore from the Margins. And it was actually that collaborative work, as well as collaborative, brainstorming and talking about this with community members, actually even my family, that little by little I was starting to find the strands and the story that I wanted to tell, and how to tell this particular story, and specifically grounded in Purépecha epistemologies and way of thinking. So one of the things definitely that happened that is very different from the dissertation to the book, right, is that I rebuilt the whole theoretical framework. I kept the data, obviously, and the stories, but I basically chucked all the theory in order to then bring everything from Purépecha epistemologies and way of thinking, and then everything started to fall into place. And thinking about different ways of seeing the book and organizing the book. So a little bit in terms of like what the book does, let me tell you, right? What is the roadmap? So in total, the book comprises 6 chapters, in addition to the introduction, obviously, and a conclusion, as well as an interlude. The first chapter, Under the Volcano's Shadow, follows an imaginary walk through the community to provide brief yet crucial background information about the Purépecha region and Angahuan specifically. So anthropology first chapters tend to be just, let's be honest, kind of boring contextual information that nobody that doesn't work in that community is interested in. So I really struggled with that chapter, and I was like, how can I do this in ways, but that also, again, reflect Purépecha epistemologies. And one of the things that is a theme throughout the book is actually the idea of walking. We walk not only like because we just walk everywhere, but it's because a lot of things happen with walking. And as I talk later in the book, it's actually a lot of the rituals are actually a movement, so that I talk about walking again became one of the metaphors that actually guide and appears throughout the whole book, right? So this idea. So I use then the metaphor of walking and this imaginary walk to then take us and do this journey of the contextual chapter and journey for the book. The second chapter, Carrying the Warota, focuses on social organization, general youth culture, and courtship rituals in Angahuan. And in this particular, what I then start doing, right, is obviously the whole thing, you know, the big view, and then little by little getting into the smaller pieces of the community. But specifically, I then talk about social organization, right? Because then that is going to take us into the third chapter, which I'll share a little bit more in a moment, with my first, introducing one of my first concepts, which is this idea of the toca. And its relation to eloping or asking for marriage. So you know, in the second chapter, right, I'm talking about courtship rituals, and I'm like, okay, so this is after the courtship rituals, young people need to decide what they're going to do now to take their relationship into the next stage. So either they ask for hands in marriage or they elope, and that is the next chapter, right? So chapter 4 then is after they have eloped, they're going to get married. Actually, then chapter 4, Creating Culture, deals with the process of negotiation and organizing the Tembuchakwa, which is the Purepecha wedding, that is the term in Purepecha, as well as highlighting the process of creating and curating Purepecha vernacular cultural practices. So in this particular chapter, I play with this idea of, normally when we think about culture, we think about that it's static, it's created, it exists. And what I'm talking about this now, we're creating it by making decisions of how we're going to be performing particular rituals, event, cultural practices in general. So this particular chapter, chapter 4 then, is focusing again on showcasing how families negotiate how they're going to be performing the wedding. And I talk about, again, how these ideas of creating culture are based on Purepecha's ideas of creativity and aesthetics. So after the chapter 4 and between chapter 4 and chapter 5, I include an interlude, which is a detailed ethnographic description of a wedding that will be analyzed then in chapter 5. The interlude also is doing a lot of different work, which is, one is an invitation to readers to take a moment to pause and read slowly before continuing the journey, right? So it is that moment of reflection, of pausing, but also during Purepecha weddings, because they're, and I'll go over in terms of what does that look like. Purepecha weddings, they're so intense that during the day, people take breaks. You need to actually take a break to either go change, to be able to do stuff. Some people take naps before you can actually continue. So that is the influence of the idea of the interlude. So after that is the 5th chapter, which is Performing Community, which provides a deep analysis of the Miskwani, specifically the Purepecha wedding, and provides a model for unpacking the different ritual forms in Purepecha culture. So using the wedding that I presented in the interlude, then I take it into pieces in chapter 5 to then, and using Purepecha again, values specifically, to then talk about how to understand the different rituals, and specifically how by performing those rituals, people are practicing what it means to be a member of the community, right? Because we'll not jump ahead into a moment. But each of these forms that I mentioned in the chapter performs different ideas of community and Purepecha values and behaviors. In the 6th chapter, in the last chapter, Transforming the Tembuchakwa, provides a description and analysis of 4 different wedding styles that I documented during 2009-2010 in order to really think about this process of cultural transformation, right? How communities and community members change their culture practices, but I don't see change as something that was old and then it's something that is new, but there is actually the simultaneous process of continuity and transformation and change, right? So even as they're changing, they're also keeping some of the most important values and elements of the wedding. At the conclusion of the journey, I provide a description of a wedding from 2022 that was shared and documented via Facebook to showcase how wedding practices in Angahuan continue to transform based on the needs and interests of Angahuan people. So that is a little bit the overview of the book. So in terms of starting with, again, social organization, the whole process of how people get together, and then how they organize the wedding. So, and how each chapter actually is adding one piece of the puzzle into this whole idea of how people get married in Angahuan. So what I wanted to now share a little bit was to focus a little bit on chapter 3. It seems that it's one of the favorite chapters. Whenever I present it, at forums, people have been like really liking that chapter, and I'm like, okay. And because I present this idea of te toca, right? And the idea of te toca, so this is in Spanish, which it means, it has, depending on how you use it, it may have different interpretations, right? Te toca could be, it's your turn, but it could also be as your responsibility. And depending on the context, it will actually change. But as I also explain in the chapter, Purepecha as a language, they don't have that concept, right? Purepecha is it's a very specific language that if you're talking about, it's our turn to go visit someone, that type of visit will have a name, a particular name. But whenever I was, with my host family, that I was like, oh, why are we going or why are we doing this? They would explain in Spanish, oh, porque nos toca, because it's our turn, because we have to do it. And a lot of Purepecha communities, for example, that do not speak Purepecha anymore, they use te toca whenever they need to explain why they're doing something. Oh, porque nos toca, te toca, all that stuff. So I decided to borrow that phrase, even though it's in Spanish, to try to unpack this particular behavior, this particular practice, and then turn it also into a concept. And to try to understand, again, how different rituals are influenced heavily by this practice of te toca. So I wanted to share a little bit in terms of one of my experiences with te toca in relation to the wedding. So I attended my first wedding in Angahuan, the one that I described in the introduction, in 2009, a week after Holy Week. The afternoon before the wedding, my host sisters, Chucha and Pela, explained that since we were the groom's relatives, we had to bring soaps and lufas to bathe the bride at her home that evening. They said that the ritual was basically bañar a la novia, to bathe the bride, but that it was going to be more like a water fight between the relatives of the bride and the groom. Chucha and Pela wore their beautiful purepecha attire, while I wore jeans, boots, and a warm jacket. It was very cold. We walked to the community store near the main plaza to buy our soaps and lufas. Chucha and Pela have brought 2 small bateas, decorated wooden trays, that they filled with our purchases. Lisa lived near the plaza, so we waited for Pablo's relatives, the grooms to be young female relatives, sisters and female cousins. We all walked to Lisa's home, and Chucha and Pela warned me to watch out, because as soon as the water fight began, everybody would become fair game for a soaking, including me, even if I was holding a camera. Lisa's family invited us in and directed us to Lisa's room on the right side of the courtyard. Lisa was waiting for us, sitting on her bed, dressed in her purepecha attire. A line quickly formed as each person offered her their soap-filled bateas. She thanked each person as she took their soaps and lufas and placed them on her bed, returning the empty batea to its owners. I did not have a batea, so I, somewhat embarrassed, presented my gift in a plastic bag. Lisa, surprised and chuckling softly, received my plastic bag and thanked me too. Once we finished presenting the soaps and lufas, everybody left the room and then the house. Outside, a water tank sat full and ready for the battle to start. A large number of plastic buckets sat beside the water tank to be used during the water fight. Lisa's young female relatives were also there to participate and protect and defend her. While we waited for the bathing to start, Lisa's older relatives offered us milka mata. Milka mata is atole. It's a thick corn-based drink, which was greatly appreciated given how cold it was. Paulina and Laura, 2 of Pablo's sisters, were in charge of instigating the fight. They gently dragged Lisa to the middle of the patio, drenching her with water and pouring liquid soap on her head. As water splashed over the patio and street, the laughter and screams of the participants could be heard throughout the block. Chucha and Pela did not want to participate in the fight because the night was cold and the water was freezing, so they stayed half a block away and waited for me to finish taking pictures. After one of Lisa's brothers decided to throw water at the guests who were only watching, luckily I had managed to protect my camera, only getting my back wet, we decided to take that as our cue to go home. So despite my best attempts, I would end up drenched in a lot of these events. But despite multiple previous research trips to Angahuan, that night was the first time I experienced the practice of nostoka in relation to a wedding. The reason this was the first time I participated was that it was our turn to do so, and people in Angahuan only attend or help at events where te toca. They have a responsibility to do so. As I discussed in previous chapters, Purepecha cultures stratify and organize based on social position and gender. Depending on a person's gender and social position, will have different tasks and roles during community and family rituals and celebrations, so one only goes to events where te toca. Before going to bathe the bride, I had participated in other events, such as visiting a relative who had just given birth and nos tocaba ir, we had to go, bringing presents to the baby and mother. Covering the spectrum of life events, from special milestone celebrations to routine field work, sharing in a happy event, or supporting each other during times of misfortune, this sense of responsibility is rooted in a reciprocity system, is a significant ingredient in the recipe that enables the continuity of Purepecha culture in Angahuan. In addition to the sense of responsibility, the practice of te toca brings to mind a game of taking turns, fairness, opportunity, and rotation. The practice of te toca is crucial to Angahuan daily life, and there are cultural repercussions if the order of exchange is broken. This concept and practice, therefore, directly reflects Purepecha worldviews and values, and helps us understand how and why people make decisions about how to create and perform their cultural practices. So this practice, again, of te toca is, even though I'm, framing it in that particular way, it's actually, as I mentioned, right, practice, and you engage with it in some cases unconscious ways, right? Because nos toca, we have to go. There's no question about it. But in other cases, like te toca, you need to go, right? So in terms of and how it's manifested, and how it's again performed and engaged, and how also thinking about when you're a child, little by little, you're being taught how to do this, right? That we were talking about that a little in your morning's class with Soli. So te toca again is represented and performed in the wedding in a lot of different ways. So in this particular chapter, I decided to focus on the process of when young couple has decided that they want to be together, they have two options, right? Or asking for the bride's hand in marriage, or eloping. And just in case, this is something, I didn't go into that in the chapter necessarily, but these two practices are also the two wedding practices that are described in La Relación de Michoacán, which is a text from 1542, from just after the conquest, that is the first text to describe a Purepecha wedding. And so the high class, the lords and stuff like that, they would ask for the bride's hand in marriage, and then the peasant class, which were called Purepecha, they were the ones that would elope. So this practice, again, it's pre-colonial. So in terms of, but now everybody, one is not reserved for the higher class or not. Everybody has that option. But the options and why people elope versus how or who is asked hand in marriage is very heavily political, right? But one of the things that I focus in this chapter is what are the repercussions of one or the other, and then how then people then have to do. So this is Amalia's engagement story. In the summer of 2011, I visited Amalia at her job as Padre Armando's assistant in the parish, where she oversaw the scheduling and organizing of the church's main events and served as a language interpreter between Padre Armando and parish members. I often visited her while she worked, and we spent many afternoons chatting and discussing religious practices in Angahuan. That day was the first time I had seen her since I left in Ferry 2010, so we had a lot to catch up on. After the initial greeting, she informed me that the week before my arrival in Angahuan, her boyfriend, Joaquin, had gone to her house with his family to ask for her hand in marriage. Amalia and Joaquin had talked about getting married, and he had told her that he wanted to ask for her hand but during the dinner being held in her honor for her Saint's Day. An aunt was visiting from the United States, and Joaquin wanted to take advantage of her presence to ask for Amalia's hand. However, Amalia did not believe him. The next night, though, as promised, Joaquin arrived, accompanied by his parents and aunt. Amalia was in shock. When Amalia's mother saw Joaquin's intention, the family quickly called some of Amalia's uncles and aunts to the house to help them with the ritual. Joaquin's family had brought 2 baskets of presents, mainly fruit and bread. Amalia's younger sister received the baskets, and Amalia scolded her because by receiving the baskets, the family was entering into a reciprocal relationship with Joaquin's family. Amalia told me she was shocked and embarrassed by the whole process. She had to go outside to greet his family, and then Joaquin's relatives returned the greeting and gave her their blessing. She and Joaquin waited in the kitchen while their parents and relatives talked on the patio. So the newlyweds do not participate in their engagement. That is parentheses, that's not in the book. But throughout the evening, her family repeatedly asked her about her decision and what she wanted to do. They wanted to respect her decision, especially wanted to make sure that Joaquin's family was not coaxing her? Is that coaxing that word? To do something she did not want to do. Joaquin's family also wanted to make sure that Amalia loved Joaquin. Joaquin's mother talked to her and questioned her about her motives. Because it was Amalia's saint day, her family had prepared a special dinner. Padre Armando and Sandra, the priest's housekeeper, who were also Amalia's friends, had come to celebrate her saint's day. I spoke to Padre Armando afterward. He told me that as soon as he arrived, they invited him in and made him part of the council, but he did not know what was happening. He doesn't speak Purepecha. He told me that Amalia looked like she was in shock. Throughout the evening, Amalia's father called from the United States. He was informed of the situation and took part in the conversation over phone. An uncle asked Amalia what she thought about the proposal. Amalia said that she did not want to say no, but that she wanted to talk to her father first. By that point, her mother had already accepted tequila and was drinking, which to some degree signals an approval or an implicit yes to the proposal. I know. Amalia was studying to become a teacher, and her family was concerned that Joaquin's family and even Joaquin would not let her pursue a teaching career after working so hard to acquire her education. Amalia was also aware of this danger. During our conversation, she told me that she was seriously considering all her options, including postponing the wedding as late as possible to finish her degree. That night during the waripini, that is the name for asking for the bride's hand in marriage, both parties agreed that they would meet again in 2 weeks so Amalia could give her answer. But later, and especially because the celebration of Santo Santiago, the patron saint of the community, was fast approaching, Amalia's family expressed a desire to postpone the decision until after the celebration. They did get married, they have kids, but in this particular here, in terms of looking for the toca, the family, when this started happening, that Joaquin's family came in, immediately needed to call her grandparents, relatives, because they had to be present. Les tocaba estar presente. They needed to be there. But Amalia and Joaquin, the people that are involved in this decision, it was not their place to be there, even if they were part of the conversation. So here in the process of the asking for the bride's hand in marriage, right, it is this very important negotiation. And during actually this event, the waripini, they start organizing the wedding, what is going to happen, and they start negotiating elements for the marriage. I have never obviously been in these events because no me toca. So that is something that I also talk about a little bit in the introduction, for example, is how even this concept of the toca influenced and guided my research practice. Because there were a lot of events where I couldn't be there because no me tocaba, right? So I was in moments, for example, and there's another moment that I talk about in this chapter, where my host parents, for example, were asked to be godparents in a wedding. So we were having supper, it's already at night, we're hanging out around the fire pit. And suddenly this couple knocks the door, one of the daughters walks them in, they come in, and they're bringing a bottle of tequila. We sit them, we attend to them, and then one of my host sisters, she signals to me, and she's like, Mintzi, we gotta go. And I'm like, okay. And then I follow her into our room. When I'm there, I sleep in the girls' room. So at that time, we're all married now. I have my own room now. So we're all in the same room. I'm like, what is going on? And they're like, oh, they're probably asking to ask our parents for something, but we cannot be there. I'm like, okay. And then, so even, for example, this practice of the toca really also influenced my methods in terms of what I could be there. Because for newlyweds, in some parts of their wedding, they don't even participate. It's only for certain groups. Or there is one event in the wedding, now that is already happening, that young people don't see it until they get married, because it's a private ritual. So I do describe it because it's not, so it's a private ritual, but it's not a secret ritual, because that was important, because if it was something that was secret, it would not be in the book. I asked permission, and they're like, yeah, you can write it, you can talk about it, it's private, it's not secret. So in terms of, and describing, but again, a lot of the newlyweds, they only saw it when they first participated into, and they were getting married. So this practice of the toca, again, really influences behavior, really influences how people participate, how people engage, and then how then the wedding is organized. So how are we on time? Okay, so that was an example of the asking for the marriage. So I'll very quickly talk about now Chucha's elopement story. So this was my host sister that she decided to elope after I left. I may have been kind of annoyed by that because then I missed the whole thing, and then her wedding was in October during an AFS, American Folklore Society, so I couldn't go to her wedding. I missed her wedding, but I sent money, so I became the godmother of the video, of the photographer in the video. So I paid for someone to record the video, and then I got the recording of the video of the wedding. And I can actually so I can show you that one, don't allow. So this is Chucha's wedding. So Chucha is the one, so this is a picture of 4 people in front of an altar. The couple is in the middle. The bride is wearing a white wedding gown. Oh, it's moving now. A white wedding gown. And then the godparents are flanking the bride and groom. So this was their wedding. So they send me all the pictures and all that stuff, the images later. But so this is their wedding. So their wedding, or her werakwini, which is her elopement. So when you elope, there are 2 ways that you can elope. One is by violence, so that the bride maybe doesn't want to go and they take her by force. In some of those cases, that one is really rare now. But in some of those cases, especially if she was taken without her consent, the family and will take her back and be like, nope, you're not. She didn't want to go, so you're not go. The most common is that the bride wants to go. And the reason why a lot of young couples do elopement is, one is because it's actually cheaper than asking for the bride's hand in marriage. Because if they ask for the bride's hand in marriage, they have to do a lot of gifts to the bride's family, whereas with the elopement, it's just a couple of gifts and you're done. And also the elopement, again, forces the marriage in cases where families don't agree, or when there's gossip, or there's a lot of different influences that are happening in terms of, but it's actually the most common way of how people actually get together, the elopement, even though it's, frowned upon. But it's the one that they do. So, so the second I was mentioning is, again, that is by accord. And in some cases, actually, one of the couples that eloped when I was there that I was close to, she had moved her clothes without her family actually noticing. So before her elopement, so she had been getting out of the house little by little. But this is Chucha's story. So Chucha eloped with Jose, now her husband, in July 2010 during the main dance of the celebration of Santo Santiago on July 25th. Jose asked Chucha during the dance to elope with him. Chucha told me that they had talked about eloping, but only teasingly. Jose really wanted to elope with Chucha, but she had her misgivings as she wanted to wait for the appropriate moment. During the dance, Jose proposed to Chucha and asked her to elope with him. Overcoming her feelings of indecision, Chucha decided to go with him. Jose's parents' house is beside the plaza, so they did not have to walk far. One of Chucha's aunts lives in front of Jose's home and saw Chucha enter the house. Chucha told me that once she was seen, there was no turning back. She had many thoughts running through her mind. No, ¿qué hice? Ya no hay para atrás, ni modo. Es que se siente así muy raro, con miedo, porque dices, ¿qué pasará? ¿Qué dirá la gente? ¿Cómo será su familia? ¿Cómo serán sus hermanos? ¿O cómo verán a mí? ¿Sí será lo que estarán esperando? What have I done? I cannot go back. Oh well. It feels really weird, scared, because you ask yourself, what will happen? What will people think? What will his family be? How will his family be? How about his siblings? Or how will they see me? Will I be what they were hoping for? After the couple entered the house, Jose woke his parents to let them know he had eloped with Chucha. Jose's mother asked Chucha if she had been brought by force or if she had come of her own accord. After Jose's mother made sure that Chucha had not been forced, she greeted her. Bienvenida seas a la casa. Gracias por no tenernos miedo. Gracias por no tenerle miedo a mi hijo. Welcome to our home. Thank you for not being afraid of us. Thank you for not being afraid of our son. But Chucha was afraid. She waited for her parents to come looking for her. Chucha was also afraid because her parents would scold her sisters, who were supposed to have been with Chucha during the dance. After 20 minutes or so, Juana, Emiliano, and Chucha's older sister arrived at Jose's house. Chucha told me that her sisters and mother cried together as they made sure that Chucha was firm in her decision and that she was safe. They returned to their home that same night, accompanied by Jose's parents, who had to go to Chucha's home for the first part of the Potpinsani. The Potpinsani is the ritual to ask for forgiveness. So Jose's parents took some tequila to Nahuan and Emiliano's home and talked with them until early morning, asking for forgiveness. As they were leaving, Jose's parents informed Nahuan and Emiliano that they would return later that morning to continue the Potpinsan. That morning, Chucha helped with the chores in Jose's house, and Pela brought her some clean clothes. Relatives gathered at Jose's home and prepared food to take to Chucha's home. When Jose's maternal grandmother arrived, she knelt in front of Chucha and asked for her hand. Chucha was embarrassed, but did as she was told. The grandmother said, "Gracias por aceptarnos a nosotros y que te hayas animado a venir con él y que espero que él cambie ahora sí contigo. Thank you for accepting us and that you decided to come with him. I hope that he will now change with you." When Jose's parental grandmother arrived, she did the same thing. Chucha told me that she was touched by the welcome she received. She recognized that her experience was not common, as many young women are chastised or even shunned by the young man's family. When the food was ready, Jose's family went to Chucha's home to take the food to Chucha's family. Chucha and Jose stayed at Jose's house, but after dinner, Chucha and Jose were summoned to Chucha's home. According to Chucha, Jose's family had told Jose that if Chucha's family's relatives insulted him, he should not say anything because he was at fault. When Chucha and Jose arrived at the Gomez Santa Cruz home, their first responsibility was to kneel in front of Emiliano, Chucha's father, offer their hands, and ask for forgiveness. Emiliano took their hands and said, "Pues ni modo, así tendría que ser." Oh well, I suppose this is the way it was supposed to be. Chucha and Jose had to kneel in front of all the family members, offer their hands, and ask for forgiveness. As part of the Potpinsan agreement, Nahuana did not want Chucha and Jose to live together before the wedding. Jose's family agreed. His mother believed they should wait to live together after they were married. But that day, Chucha returned to Jose's house. The next day, her future mother-in-law, one of Jose's sisters, and Jose returned Chucha to her parents' home to live there until the Miswani, the wedding. That day, they took a basket of fruit, bread, and other gifts to give to Nahuana and Emiliano. So in these two stories, different ways in which the toca are, performed, right, or are seen or evident, and because similarly to Amalia and Joaquin, Chucha and Jose could not participate in a lot of the ritual because it was the older generation that had to participate and they had to stay. And there were different ways, again, that they were being told of how they were supposed to participate. How les toca participar, les toca actuar, right? How they're supposed to do all these different things. So this particular chapter is in the middle of the chapter, right? So it gets us to the plot. Or to the, not to the plot, but it gets us to that moment of like, okay, now they're getting married, what is going to happen? Because to some degree, that was what I wanted to do this as a wedding story, right? What happens with a couple and how they get together and then how then they're celebrating the wedding. So the last chapters of the book are definitely focusing on unpacking what the wedding looks like, right? And it's 3 days of celebrations, it's 3 days of intense movement throughout the community, and all of that is in the second part of the book, right? In terms of getting us, in terms of starting to put all the pieces together. So this is, as much as I love this book, obviously it's not a perfect book, right? It has its own limitations. There are some things that are left unexplored. There's some, one that I just found out presenting in a conference recently, which is very, very interesting, is a term that I use for wedding, tembuchaqua, which was given to me by my research collaborators in other Purepecha communities, is the one that is used for the groom's family. And if you're a member of the bride's family, it's another term. And in this other community, they have a third term that is the general term for wedding. And I'm like, wow, well, and this is the term that I was given in Angahuan, but at the same time, all my research collaborators that were helping with the Purepecha language are male. So thinking about who was giving me, I know. So I don't know if now I need to go back and be like, oh, so the term that I'm using throughout the whole book could be wrong. But there are other aspects and other stories, for example, that I could not include in the book, right? So, for example, the book does not focus on relationships where one of the newlyweds, for example, is not from Angahuan. This is actually not that common, although it's getting more common little by little, especially, for example, the wedding that I describe at the end, which is from 2022, it was very, very interesting, and that was documented in Facebook because one, the bride is from Angahuan, but she was raised in California, Southern California, so they went back to get married. The groom is not from Angahuan, it's not Purepecha, and because they didn't have the different elements, they actually had a wedding venue and they had bridesmaids, which you don't have, but there were bridesmaids dressed in coordinating Purepecha attires. But they don't do that. That is not a thing that they do in weddings in Angahuan. But then they did other rituals that are associated with the wedding. So it's fascinating. But I couldn't interview them. There's stuff that happened there, falling out between families. But Facebook, thank you. And the other, in terms of limitations, and some of the limitations of the book is that in many ways, in all ways, this is a very heterosexual, heteropatriarchal book. And where all the weddings and all the relations that I'm talking about are binary, and then again, are heteronormative. Unfortunately, because of conquest and colonization, Purepecha culture and many other Purepecha communities, they lost their third genders and the flexibility. And so Purepecha community tends to be, and we were talking about this earlier in your class with your students, so that the roles, even though if they're complementary and parallel, meaning one is not more important than the other and they work together, but it's based on the idea there are only two genders. So everything in the wedding, the way that it's organized, the way it's performed, is all based on this idea that this is the role of the women, les toca hacer esto as women, and then this is the role of the men, this is what they can do. So one of the things is that even though, so that is definitely something, and I do mention it at the end in the conclusion, there's limitations because fortunately, with some of dear colleagues here in the United States, we have a Purepecha Studies Collective, and members of that collective actually created a Queer Purepecha Studies Collective that are bringing into light all the queer stories and the queer experiences that are normally left out of even books like mine. And they're doing this work of visibilizing these stories. And so one of my dear colleagues, Mario Gomez Zamora, they just received their PhD from UC Santa Cruz. They're now a postdoc at Stanford. And their dissertation it's on queer Purepecha experiences. They do talk about actually the first Purepecha same-sex wedding that happened not in Angahuan, in a nearby community, actually near my hometown, and the community of Iwatzio. So that was in 2022, I think. So I make reference to the wedding, but I encourage people to engage with Mario's work, which is brilliant and amazing, and to really think about this. But the other reason why, for example, those stories are also left out is because in Angahuan, for the protection of some of my research collaborators who are queer Purepecha, but they're not out, and some of them have decided to be in relationships in the community, in heterosexual relationships in the community. So even if I wanted to, for example, include some of those stories, people would know who they are. Mm-hmm. So that is also in terms of that I wanted to talk about some of the limitations, but maybe they're not limitations because they also speak about ethics and they also speak about research boundaries. That I had to establish from the beginning, right? That one of the things that I wanted to make sure is that some of the stories are some stories that cannot be shared. And what are the stories that are not? But that is something that, for example, in other places that has been asked and has been raised. So I wanted to mention that some of those stories are very much left out on purpose. Mm-hmm. So even though, again, I was like, oh my God, this is so heterosexual, heteropatriarchal. But at the same time, I was like, but I cannot put them at risk, right? It's no. So, and those are some, in that case, right, also they're not necessarily stories for me to be telling. But, that is part of my decolonial kind of like praxis in terms of some of the limitations and issues. But in any case, to start wrapping up, this project is very much about family. It is very much about kinship. It's very much about reciprocity. It's very much about community. Sounds cliche, it's very much about love, right? At the end, it's about weddings. But it is about love and cariño for the community, for the place, and the people that, allowed me into the community and that have become family. And I've been very fortunate, and I didn't, talk about that in terms of research methods, but my family, for example, my parents, my siblings are in reciprocal relationships. I think, one of the images I think that that are in the book, so this is an image that it's a bunch of people, and this is actually my dad's 70th birthday. So this is my dad here in the middle with a purepecha. This is a blouse of respect, and the hat of respect for male purepecha. So my host family actually brought this to my dad's birthday. And so here's my host mom, my siblings, all the family that came from Angahuan to help us celebrate my dad's 70th when we had it in Uruapan over 10 years ago. And how they were, also celebrating. So now there is this beautiful relationship between, the families, and we go every year, and it's been very beautiful. But one of the things definitely that, it's about family, and it's about also, as I was mentioning, cultural change and transformation. And, I would like to leave with these words. So cultural practices as an expression of our beingness are complex and depend on change to survive, grow, and thrive. And while at no point this book aims to present an authentic or current view of the Purepecha region or Angahuan, I humbly offer the observations, conversations, analysis, and experiences I gathered as I learned what it meant and means to get married in Angahuan. So, thank you.